Hello, hi, my name is BB Hong, and if the title was of any indication, this video is about my current and future projects that I have planned, and man, are they a lot. If this video length is going to be of any indication, you can say that my mind comes up with a lot of stuff to the point where I have to tell other people about it, otherwise I may explode or implode in certain cases, especially since my brain gets inspired to come up with this kind of stuff a lot. For starters, the current project that I have so far, or at least the one I am currently working on, is my Sky Princess and the Gryphon Prince series. For those of you who don't know, it is a Persian-inspired fantasy adventure series that I had been working on a couple years back, with elements taken straight from the Shahnameh, along with other Middle Eastern or even South Asian aspects to give it a more unique feel. Kinda like how Avatar The Last Airbender series had a mix and match of certain cultures, ranging from East or South Asian culture mixing with adventuring. If you want to check out my Sky Princess and the Gryphon Prince series, it's available right now on my YouTube channel Rando Ramblo in a sort of audio/podcast series. So far I have made 14 chapter videos along with some bonus videos that explain bits and pieces of the lore, setting, and characters who will appear in my series. Of course, this will not be the only story series I have planned. Oh, no, this is only the beginning of my plans. Now, these are the current projects that I am working on. The Terrestria universe, the Tergeo universe, the Comet Princess, the Child of Destiny, Portent Saga, and Enhanced universe. Before you say anything, no, the Terrestria universe and Tergeo universe do not take place in the same universe despite the similar sounding names. As for what their respective genres are and what you could expect from them, they all vary depending on the story I plan on making. The Terrestria universe is a fantasy-themed story with fairy tale or folktale elements that usually involve various heroes fighting against the forces of evil, ranging from demons to witches and warlocks, along with various other criminals. It loosely adapts certain fairy tales, ranging from Jack and the Beanstalk to even Godfather Death, as well as various other famous or obscure stories that have been told throughout history. Not only that, the world of Terrestria has fairy tale-like entities, known as the fairy folk, with beings ranging from the usual fairies to goblins and giants. As for what constitutes as the main superpower, or for magic within the universe, it is something called essence, and it is considered the life force of most, if not all, living beings. When it comes to how Terrestria came to be, it was created by a being known as Theos, or the Creator as many call him. He, along with his angels, governed the world akin to how the Abrahamic God created and ruled over the world. Of course, like in the Bible, along with so many other creation myths, something goes wrong and a great evil arises, namely a demonic entity named Diabolos who decided to corrupt humans, Fae, and even the world just because he could. Hence why the rest of the story involves Theos and his angels choosing various beings to serve as heroes and help repair the damage caused by the demons so that Terrestria will not get destroyed. The Tergeo universe series is a more supernatural series that has elements of magic realism and paranormal, but mostly slice-of-life themes in this case. It is more Christian-themed, but it remains subtle, unlike most Christian-themed works, as it delves into realistic situations that are meant to provide moral life lessons rather than fluff or spectacles that don't contribute to anything. As for the setting, it takes place within a world known as Tergeo, which is an alternate version of Earth, but with its own version of humanity known as Tergians. The only difference between them and real humans is that while they do have realistic skin tones, lifespans, and blood, their hair colors and eye colors vary and can range from blonde to being blue-colored, kinda like how the humans are portrayed in works like Code Geass or even League of Legends. Of course, the hairstyles Tergians have will be more realistic and not so exaggerated or ridiculous like the kind you see in anime, comics, or even games. In regards to the lore and plot, the world of Tergeo was created by a being named Alova, who created the Tergians in order to have them live in peace along with him and his angelic servants known as Malaks. Unfortunately, like in many creation stories, especially the Christian or Abrahamic kind, one of his former Malaks, who would later be known as Beelzebub, betrayed him by causing a rebellion and later corrupting the early Tergians to the point of making them either rebel against Alova or forget about him. One major aspect of this world is the belief in Alova and the Messiah of this world, known as Emmanuel, with the believers being known as Emmanuelites. As a result, you can expect most of the characters to be of Emmanuelite origin, or at least follow, if not reference it at times. Plus, as stated before, the angels in this world are known as Malaks, or at least they're considered to be the equivalent of angels, with demons or fallen angels especially being known as Kakomalaks, to give a different contrast between them. The Comet Princess is one of the few sci-fi stories I have planned, along with my Portent Saga and Enhanced Universe series. It is also an action-packed mecha-themed story that combines aspects from various mech-themed shows or movies such as Neon Genesis Evangelion, Pacific Rim, but mainly Darling in the Franxx. For those of you who missed a promotional video I made a few years back, it involves humanity being at war with an alien race known as the Overseers, who seek to terraform the Earth and subjugate everyone there. The humans end up having to pilot giant mechs known as Celestials in order to better combat the alien threat. The stakes are high, especially with the damage caused to their environment, which involved the sea levels having risen to the point where humanity and other animals or plants having to live on top of mountain peaks, as well as special ship homes in order to better survive the conditions. Not to mention the heroes, especially the main protagonist Asteria, have to deal with the Overseers getting stronger, opportunistic rivals, and dark secrets that could ruin everything. It balances action as well as drama, like any other good mecha story does, and is very anime-esque, like my other stories, given how anime, manga, cartoons, and movies did inspire most, if not all, my stories. The Child of Destiny is yet another fantasy story that I have planned, and similar to the Sky Princess and the Gryphon Prince story, it involves a chosen one character going on an adventure to recruit new allies in order to fulfill a prophecy. However, in this case, the main protagonist, whose name is Tong, he is a fugitive who is forced on the run thanks to the machinations of demonic creatures known as Abominati and their corrupt human cohorts. Because of this, he has to travel across the country of Kayarak in order to survive in the corrupted world he resides in, while also seeking answers to his purpose, along with the mysterious powers he was born with that only come out when he is agitated or stressed. I also plan on making it Korean-themed, as the character's setting and lore will be inspired by Korean mythology and even history. Since I myself am Korean and fascinated by myths as well as history, I figured why not combine my interest in this upcoming story. As previously mentioned, Portent Saga will be another sci-fi series that I have planned, with some mechs to add to the mix as well. Though unlike Comet Princess, it is more of an epic sci-fi fantasy akin to Star Wars or even Star Trek, with bits of Warhammer 40k and Halo added to the mix, albeit it's more idealistic compared to them. In this case, it takes place in a galaxy where the native alien races are being attacked by a demonic group of invaders known as Otherworlders, who seek to dominate the entire galaxy by terraforming their worlds and enslaving the population of each planet in order to sustain themselves. They are especially after the natural and mystical energy each world and population has, known colloquially as cosmos, which you can say is like the Force but more diverse in superpowers. However, because this made them an easier target for the Otherworlders to use or even consume for sustenance, many Cosmos users were lost over time, thus forcing many races to adapt in different ways. They did so when several mysterious meteorites landed on certain planets during the early stages of the war that proved to be effective against the Otherworlders and allowed the civilians to advance in technology and strength, with the only downside being that they could no longer use Cosmos anymore. One soldier who was a super soldier plus cyborg named Orion would discover a hidden world known as Alphaheim that was rich with cosmos but under attack by Otherworlders like so many others in the past, though he only came across this world after crash landing and being separated from his crew thanks to an Otherworlder he was fighting against. He would befriend some of the native inhabitants, such as the plucky Alphaheim girl Hermia and her older sister Artemisia, who wished to redeem their family name after their ancestor supposedly tried to destroy the sealed-off world. Of course, dark secrets and conspiracies occur when the trio continue to fight against Otherworlders together, with the latter two aliens realizing just how big their universe really is outside of Alphaheim. A fun fact, the story was actually inspired by an old fanfic concept me and a friend of mine made, which was a crossover between Halo, Centaur World, and even Primal. I know it sounds crazy, but we managed to make it work in context. There will also be a superhero-themed story that I have planned, known as the Enhanced Universe series, as mentioned earlier, and similar to Comic Princess and Portent Saga, it will be more sci-fi themed, but with elements found mostly in the usual superhero or even law enforcement-based shows. The series will take place in the real world, or at least a fictionalized version of Earth, where humans with superpowers known as enhanced beings exist, with instances of them having once used their powers for both good and evil being mentioned. The first installment that I have planned takes place in a fictional city known as Nelva City, which is located in Ontario, Canada, and is actually named after the Canadian superheroine Nelvana, and by extension the company of the same name. Most of the stories will take place within the city or in locations close to it, but others will take place outside of Canada, such as France, a la Miraculous Ladybug, but in a different way. As for what the stories will be like in tone, it will be relatively optimistic, but still realistic with some dark themes, because what story doesn't have dark themes at this rate? The genres will range from superhero, obviously, but it will also have elements of drama, action, mystery, romance, and even comedy, as well as some buddy cop themes too. Some of my stories won't even focus solely on superheroism, as they will focus on regular day-to-day life problems or incidents that just so happen to feature enhanced beings. You could say I wanted to take a page out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe back when it was good, and early DC or Marvel comics that tended to focus on other themes besides superheroes. Now, these are some of my future projects and one-shot stories that I have planned. Rise of the Abandoned, Call the Voice, A Queen and Her Beast, Death of the Five Houses, Phantasmagoria, and The Good Con Man. While I do call them one-shots, it's not necessarily because they'll be short stories that are only a few pages long or anything. Rather, they will be standalone stories that I don't plan on expanding upon so much compared to my other projects and stories, like the Terrestrius series, though some of them may have a few more stories that will expand on the lore, but even then, it'll be very limited compared to my other planned stories. Rise of the Abandoned is a somewhat gritty but still optimistic series that takes elements from X-Men as well as Rebellion-based stories like Akame ga Kill and even Arcane. In this case, it involves a young man named Joseph who turns from an innocent lad to a hardened yet noble rebel and assassin after being abandoned by his older brother to die, and discovering how the home he lives in, known as the Regalis Empire, has fallen from grace to the point of becoming horribly corrupt, if not stagnant. As a result, he joins the assassination/rebel group, the Abandoned, who are mostly made up of disgraced and discarded civilians of the Empire due to either class divisions or because they possess unique superpowers, which have caused them to be dubbed uncannies by the populace, with the mysterious leader, Pax, mentoring him and making new, if strange, friends within the group. Joseph resolves to find a way to put an end to the corruption that is slowly destroying the Empire, while also seeking to punish his brother for abandoning him to die in the first place. Either way, a great change is occurring with the corrupt rulers and its civilians, like it or not. Call the Voice is a classic trapped in another world story that I have planned, but in this case it involves a group of childhood friends who find themselves being trapped in a fantasy world that has been ravaged by a war that occurred years ago. With assistance from a mysterious female guide who chose to save this world through the main protagonist Trisha, they have to find a way to go back home while also restoring this strange new world. Of course, things are a lot more complicated than they look, especially when it seems like the natives of this world aren't as friendly towards the group as they had hoped, with danger being all around them. Can they survive this encounter and go back to their original homes in one piece, if possible? I plan on making it something of a deconstruction of the usual isekai story that everyone knows by now, while also delving into the psychological aspects of it when these types of adventures affect the main characters, especially Trisha. A Queen and Her Beast is yet another fantasy story, but in this case it has no relation to the Terrestrius series, or even the Call the Voice, as the setting is somewhat different, if a bit lighter compared to both stories and their universes. In this case, it involves the Sacra Kingdom being attacked by demonic entities known as Defoles, who seek to invade and take it over under orders of their ruler Bahuta. However, when the queen of the Sakura Kingdom, Clarice, nearly gets killed in battle by the demonic entity, she's saved by a lowly knight named Mortimer, or Mort, as most call him, when he transforms into a kaiju. Yeah, that's right, a literal kaiju. Using his newfound abilities, he's able to not only save the queen, but also drive out the devils, only to discover that the devil he killed earlier wasn't actually Bahuta himself, but rather it was a decoy that was sent in his place to gauge the enemy's power before partaking in the fight himself. As a result, the queen, along with Mort and some of their most trusted associates and knights, end up going on a journey to find Bahuta's hideout and take him down once and for all, with Mort wishing to know where his powers came from while he's at it. Of course, there will be some romance, as many fantasy stories tend to have, with Mort and Clarice starting to become attracted to one another, especially after Mort saved her. But whether they will get together or not is a secret. By the way, I was inspired by the novel/anime series Overlord, where the most recent arc, the Paladin of the Holy Kingdom, or the Sacred Kingdom as the movie version is called, where it involved a kingdom having to fight against an army of monsters and demons. However, unlike that story, mine will be a lot more optimistic and actually give the heroes a much better chance at fighting these dark forces so as to not paint such a bleak picture. Death of the Five Houses is basically what happens when the rich end up pushing the poor a bit too far, especially since it's basically my answer to Game of Thrones, or A Song of Ice and Fire as it is technically called. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind the series and respect it for its unique storytelling, especially regarding the concept of low fantasy and not relying too much on magic to make it more interesting. I was also partially inspired by revenge stories, since this one involves a young peasant boy named Caden who witnesses his parents being killed by raiders and later discovers that said raiders were hired by one of the 5 noble houses that reign supreme over the country they live in. As a result of this heinous action, along with how the noble houses demanded more taxes and tariffs from the peasants without giving any regard for their well-being, he, along with a disgruntled former soldier, resolved to put an end to the 5 houses while making risky alliances with some of the more benevolent, if minor, noble houses. However, Caden will have to learn how to trust others, along with learning to let go of his grief and anger he has over his parents' demise, which may affect his judgment and desire to live sooner or later. I was also inspired by the Resident Evil games, or more specifically Resident Evil Village, where it too had corrupt and dangerous noble houses that basically ruled over the land as tyrants, with the hero obviously having to take them down, albeit for different reasons. And I was also inspired by this fanfic I read, which was a crossover between Game of Thrones and Warhammer, known as The Death of Ice and Fire, and in this case I figured, why not make a rebellion story similar to that, but with a more, you could say, mundane aspect rather than the supernatural or fantastical aspect that was featured in it. Phantasmagoria is yet another isekai-themed story which takes place in yet another fantasy world, and like Call the Voice, it involves a young character getting stuck in another world. This time, however, it involves a young boy named Barnaby who gets sent to the titular world of Phantasmagoria after getting into a car accident with his parents. However, unlike most isekai or portal fantasy protagonist, Barnaby does not want to go back to his original world or home for personal reasons, which gets expanded later on in very tragic ways and affects his decision-making later on. Of course, like with Call the Voice, Barnaby finds out that this strange new world isn't all that's cracked up to be, and is a lot darker, if more personal, than he assumes. The Good Con Man is a unique story as it technically features a criminal as the protagonist, though in his case he's something of a sympathetic criminal who gradually gets better over time. In this case, it involves a con man who, I'm still thinking of what to name him, who has a habit of scamming rich people that are usually women by making them think he'll marry them, only to run off with the money he tricks them into giving him. Of course, in any other story, he would most certainly be the villain and not someone to root for at all. But when the audience gets to know him better, along with seeing him genuinely change after falling in love with one of his targets, that is when we see he's capable of redemption. Unfortunately, stories like these usually don't have happy endings, as sooner or later the girl the conman falls in love with will find out about his dark secret, and he will have to deal with the fallout that comes with it. Inspirations for the story range from The Music Man and bits of Better Call Saul, though ironically that show was more of an unintentional reference in my case. I mentioned a while back that I was making a thematic trilogy of my own, akin to certain movies or franchises like the Irish Folklore trilogy, for example. In this case, I have deemed the works that I mentioned earlier as being a trilogy of its own, albeit a spiritual and thematic one, with each story involving a protagonist who is the chosen one and having to endure the hardships that come with it. The title is called the Chosen Trilogy to go with it, though in this case it has no relation to the Chosen TV series, as it is a completely different work, even if I am Christian myself. The Chosen Trilogy will be comprised of the Sky Princess and the Gryphon Prince, the Comet Princess, and the Child of Destiny. And while they obviously won't take place in the same universe, I figured they have similar themes that would make it easier for them to be considered a trilogy, at least in similarities. One of my biggest plans is to make a media franchise, since it is not only able to help expand my storytelling skills, but also hopefully reach out to others and make my own mark on the world, but in a good way. Also, I wish to spread life lessons and morals to others through my stories, since I feel like a lot of shows unfortunately care too much about money and encouraging negative, if not toxic, lessons for others for the sake of publicity. But I'm not like that. I wish to maintain my integrity and dignity, thank you very much. Now, the planned franchises and series I have are the Terrestrial Universe, the Terrageo Universe, Portent Saga, and the Enhanced Universe. As you can see, I plan on creating, you can say, a lot of expanded universes for each of them, since I know there are going to be lots of stories to tell, and you can say they will be my most ambitious projects that I am working on in the future to hopefully earn enough money as well. Of course, it won't just be about the money. I consider myself a storyteller first and foremost, rather than a businesswoman, especially when it comes to more independent or original works. Hope you look forward to it. More videos and updates on my YouTube channel, Tumblr, or even Facebook account will be made over time regarding my plans.